today, Monday the 17th of March, 10 o'clock. In accordance with Section 43 of the Local Government in Scotland Act 2003, it has been directed that this meeting will be conducted in such a manner as to allow remote attendance by elected members. The meeting will also be live streamed. Before we go into the business, I would just to go round and ask everybody if they would introduce themselves and what their designations are.
Councillor Ralph Kelly, Deputy Convener.
Councillor Gordon Forrest.
Councillor Jim Flynn.
And Douglas Blythe, legal advisor to the committee.
Jim Miller, Committee Services Team Leader.
Julie Seidel-Gregory, Planning Advisor to the committee.
Okay, thank you for that. Apologies, I don't think there's been any because everybody's here. Fine, that takes us to item 2 on your agenda this morning, which is declaration of interest. And just for clarity, I will read this out. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. Have we any declarations of interest at this time? None? None recorded, thank you. That takes us to item 3 on your agenda, which is the Planning and Review Committee procedures. And for that, we'll hand you over to our officer, Mr. Blythe. Thank you, sir. Pages 2 to 6 on your agenda papers.
Thank you, Convener. I'll just briefly summarise the procedures. This is a planning review. It's a review of an officer's delegated decision. The review is conducted in accordance with the Scheme of Delegation and Local Review Procedures 2013. The first task for the committee is to determine whether they have sufficient information to make a decision and to conduct a review. If not, there are various procedures open to the committee, namely written submissions, site visits, or indeed a hearing. For this particular case, it's not the first time we've convened to discuss this matter. We've already been on site and we've had a hearing. Emanating from that hearing was a request for further written submissions, which have come back and are before members today. Mrs. Seidel-Gregory will pinpoint those in due course for members. As with any planning decision, members are reminded that they should take their decision in accordance with the development plan, unless material considerations dictate otherwise. But beyond that, it's for members to assess the relevant policies, any material considerations, and to arrive at a decision. That's all from me. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, members, do you believe you have enough information to carry on with the meeting this morning?
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, thank you for that. Takes us to item 4, which is the erection of agricultural workers' dwelling house at land to the northeast of Ivy Cottage, Lathallan House, Madison. This is obviously a continuation, pages 70-41, and the report will be by our officer, Julie Seidel-Gregory. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Convener. As a legal advisor has stated, this is not the first time that this application has been before the committee. At the hearing session, committee concluded that additional information was required in relation to stocking records, agricultural census data, sales data, and a breakdown of accounts information for cattle and sheep for the last 3 years in relation to Lathallan Field site. The application's response to the procedure notice is at page 9 and 10 of your paper for today's meeting. You'll see that there's information on stocking, census data, sales and accounts. Your attention is drawn to the Planning Authority's response to the procedure notice, which draws on the submission by the rural consultant at pages 11 to 38 of your papers. The rural consultant remains of the view that the applicant has failed to demonstrate that the proposed development is justified and is therefore contrary to the development plan, with specific reference to MPF 4 Policy 17 and LDP 2 Policies PE 14, PE 15 and HC 05. They reviewed the information submitted by the applicant and consider that the labour requirement fails to demonstrate that an agricultural worker's dwelling house is necessary to support the sustainable management of a viable rural business at this location. The applicant was given an opportunity to respond to the council's response, and your attention is drawn to pages 39 to 41 of today's papers. The applicant disagrees with the labour requirement calculation and maintains the position that there is a locational justification for a dwelling house on site. In terms of leading discussion this morning and following the hearing session and the information received via the procedure notice and the papers which have gone before, it would be prudent for the committee to consider whether the information before you justifies the proposed development on the basis of being supported by the development plan, with specific reference to MPF4 Policy 17, which allows and supports proposals for new homes in rural areas where it's demonstrated to be necessary to support the sustainable management of a viable rural business, and there is an essential need for a worker to live permanently on or near their place of work. If the committee do not agree that there's justification and that the development accords with the development plan, noting the advice of the council's rural business consultant, consideration should be given to the evidence before you and whether any material planning considerations in this particular case would outweigh the development plan. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Julie. I'm going to now open it up to members. Well, obviously, this has been quite a time it's been on, and we had at the site visit, members will recall that we went for, which actually was 2 site visits. We went first of all to see the overall situation with this company, and I think members were really impressed with that particular stage. And then we went to the specific site at Lathallen. So how do members feel in relation to now that you've had the further information? Councillor Kelly.
I'm quite happy to go ahead with this under the NPF 4 Policy 17.5, demonstrated to be necessary to support the sustainable management of a viable rural business or croft. There's an essential need for a worker. And I think the new figures that we've got, we didn't have these figures at the last time, was flock of 342 to 378 plus cattle. So I don't see any reason for objecting to that.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Forrest.
I would agree wholeheartedly with those comments. Councillor Kelly. I live very close to it. I've seen how much it's used. I've seen that, in my view, that there has been an increase in the number of animals on the course, and I'm still very impressed with the applicant's son's husbandry of Piggoon. So I would second that.
Thank you for that. Any comments, Councillor Flynn?
Yeah, having had the site visit and then looked at the numbers, Convener, and I'm not very aware too much of farming practices, but I've seen obviously some on television and online, etc. And when it comes to lambing and looking after sheep particularly, I do understand personally it's very, very important to be there available for sometimes 24 hours a day. One, to look after the welfare of the animals, and 2, to make sure that they're fed and that the lambs are delivered safe and sound. I do remember that when we did the site visit, they explained the distance from the other business to where the fields were at Lathallen, and that involved quite a number of journeys, which could at sometimes be awkward, particularly in bad weather or in the winter. So I could see the sense in having a property there so that was, if you like, full-time hands-on availability to look after these animals. I do recognise from the numbers, I don't know if we're allowed to ask anybody the question, but when youths are pregnant or whatever they call it, they can have single lambs, twins, and sometimes on occasion triplets. So the end number of live lambs coming out can vary quite considerably, I believe, and that can increase the number quite significantly from what was presented. So I hope that gives a sort of overview how I feel.
So you're quite happy to support the motion by Councillor Kelly?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, then just to clarify the situation, and then we'll maybe go back to our legal officer just to see if he needs any wording. Councillor Kelly has formally moved that we grant the application, seconded by Councillor Forrest and supported by other members of this review committee, Councillor Flynn and myself. So it's a unanimous decision, but we'll now go to our legal officer to ask any questions in terms of the interpretation of the decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. I think the unanimous will of the committee is that the application complies with policy 17 of MPF 4 insofar as it has been demonstrated to the committee's satisfaction that it's necessary to support the sustainable development of a sustainable management of a viable rural business, and that there is an essential need for a worker to be permanently on site. The committee also cited the interests of animal welfare, and that in those circumstances they would support the grant of planning permission. I would just clarify that members are satisfied that the siting scale and design of the proposal is acceptable in terms of policy, and that planning permission will be granted subject to appropriate conditions to be determined by the Director of Police Services. I wonder perhaps whether Mrs. Seidel-Gregory could just outline the broad conditions that would be applied.
Thank you. I think it would be largely standard conditions for this proposal. I note that there were no sort of bespoke or relatively out of the ordinary conditions which were coming from the consultees. I think there would be a standard condition in relation to ground contamination. We would want to see a condition requiring a material schedule, biodiversity proposals, and the standard condition into low and zero carbon generating technologies.
Members happy with what's been said both by our legal officer and our planning officer? Councillor Kelly. Everybody agreed? Okay, thank you very much. That brings us to the end to this meeting this morning. I'd just like to thank all members and officers for coming along. Thank you very much. Safe journey home.